Welcome to the EXCELcast. I'm Jonathan Kuskiski from the EXCEL program here at the University of Michigan, and today I'm speaking with Pamela Z, who's a guest here this weekend. She's a composer, performer, media artist, and much more. Thank you, Pamela, for coming and speaking with us today.
Well, thanks for having me.
Great. So today, you have a very interesting career. There's so many things we could talk about. I think it might be nice to start with, what is your career and your life, your work life right now? I mean, give us a snapshot of a day in the life of Pamela Z.
Well, because every day is different, I think what I'll do is I'll give you a snapshot of the week that I just had, because it encompasses so many different things all in one week. This week I just finished a premiere of a work that I made for a string quartet in San Francisco, Del Sol String Quartet. And it was a piece called Attention, which was for string quartet and fixed media. We used to say tape. And the fixed media this time involved multiple channels of audio and video, which was integral to the score. And as a matter of fact, part of the score was a graphic score that they had to face the video and play what they were seeing on the screen. And so that had its premiere at a venue called the Exploratorium. It's a science museum in San Francisco that has a beautiful performance venue with a Meyer Constellation sound system in it. So getting ready for, preparing for, and then being at that concert, and also singing a piece with them on the same concert. And then the day after that, I was involved doing a solo performance of a Bjork song. There's an organization in San Francisco called Undercover, and they do sort of tribute albums and performances for iconic records. And so this time they were doing Bjork's Homogenic, and I was asked to arrange and perform the second track from that record, which is called Yoga. And so I did that. I had to, work towards arranging that piece. I arranged it for my voice and electronics, plus cello and a viola, and then had to rehearse and perform that. And that happened over the weekend in sort of a rock club. And then right after that, I flew to New York and gave a concert at NYU in the music department in the Silver Center. And then the day after that, a lecture demo to the students. So those all, and so that activity was all around my solo performance work and the work that I compose myself. And because I'm best known for performing works for voice and electronics that I have composed for myself, and doing these other things like arranging other people's songs and performing those, or composing commissioned works for chamber ensembles. It's just, they're all other little prongs of what it is that I did. So this particular week happened to hold all of those things in one week.
Wow. So so you have a rich portfolio of activities. It's pretty clear. So how far out do you think about all these activities just this week, these engagements? How far out are you thinking about those engagements? I mean, do you have a season of activities lined up, and then you add things in along the way? How does it work?
I just kind of book things as they come.
I see.
So some things are booked a year and a half in advance, or sometimes even more, and other things people call me a few weeks or usually not a few weeks, but sometimes just a few months or even a month sometimes before, and say, do you have a hole in your schedule? Can you do this? And so it's definitely, you kind of described it well, saying it's sort of plotted out in terms of the things that were already in place, and then filling in the spaces in between those.
I see. Yeah. I imagine that there's also a lot of coordination to consider in terms of the equipment that you either have to bring or the technical requirements of the venues and so forth. Yeah,
and I do have a pretty standard tech writer for if I'm doing solo performance. It's pretty much the same that I'm bringing, unless they ask me to come and perform one of my large-scale theatrical performance works, and then that will often involve shipping set elements and bringing tech personnel with me, like a lighting. I have a lighting technician and designer who I like to bring with me when I do a big, large-scale work, and I usually bring one sound person. But if I go just to do solo performances, little concerts and things like that, then I go on my own and I bring all the stuff myself. And it's these days it's pared down so that it can fit into a wheel-on-board suitcase, most of it.
That's very smart. So one of the things you've kind of implied here is that collaboration is a big part of what you do, even if you are part of what you're known for is solo work. So I'd love to hear a little bit about some of the collaborations you've undertaken, and you've worked with many, many different groups and people, Kronos Quartet, Bang & Can All-Stars, others. So how does a collaborative process work for you? I imagine there's some variance, but is it a situation typically where a group comes to you and says, Pamela, we'd love to work with you. Could you write something for us, including electronics and perhaps you performing as well? Or are there cases where through organic conversation with someone in one of these groups or as an individual artist, you kind of come up with an idea together? I'd love to hear about that.
It can be both. And when I do collaborations that are like full collaborations, then it starts with the conversation with this other artist. Usually I elect to collaborate with people whose work I really admire and who I just really feel strongly about their work, because I am used to working solo, and so life is short, so I don't really want to engage in a collaboration with somebody whose work I feel lukewarm about.
Sure.
So I usually find somebody who I got very excited about their work and we found something in common, and so those kinds of collaborations have included work with visual artists. I've made a large-scale chamber work where I composed the music and was the performer and had a chamber ensemble with me, and my collaborator was a visual artist who was making multi-projection, like an immersive projection environment. And then there's the other kind, which you were mentioning, which is the commissions. And those happen kind of how you were guessing, that usually, like for example with Kronos Quartet, they approached me and said, we'd like to commission you to make a piece. And then I had a meeting with David Harrington of Kronos, and we sat down and just talked about the things that we might do. And it was discussed, should I make something where I'm performing with them, or should I make something where it doesn't require my presence, but maybe there is some kind of either electronic or fixed media element to it. And we decided to go with a string quartet and tape. We say tape, but what we mean is fixed media audio that just rolls in as they play a track. Usually when I do those for another ensemble, I'll do with a stereo track so that they can be played in any hall that has a good sound system. And then we might discuss, sometimes they just ask me, come up with an idea, what would you like to do? And other times we sit there and we work on thinking about it together. The piece I just did for the Del Sol String Quartet was a piece called Attention, and it was all about how our focus is really challenged these days, and it's by all of these different distractions, like alert sounds that we're constantly hearing from our mobile phones, and receiving phone calls and taking them because we have our phone with us now, and all of that. And so that was my idea, but they asked me to come up with an idea, and so I was thinking a lot about that. So I came up with this idea, and then I composed a piece for them that actually involved them having to make their way through playing a piece while getting these constant interruptions, and they hear text message alert sounds, and they have to look at their phone, and then they have to sometimes change what they're doing because there's some instruction that says, now in bar 325, now play this instead, or get up and go over to the cellist and do this with her, or bother her, or or something. And so that was a fun piece to make. Piece that I made with Kronos, David was very interested in my work with language, because a lot of the work that I do involves speech sounds. And he had heard me do pieces where I had interviewed people and then taken fragments of text and built music out of it. So he wanted me to do something like that for them. And we came up with the idea that we would make a piece about speaking accents, because San Francisco is filled with people from all over the world. And so there were many accents spoken. And so I interviewed about 30 to something like that people who all speak with different, either regional American accents coming from all over the country, or people who come from other English-speaking countries like England or Canada or New Zealand or India, and then people who speak English as a second language and so have an accented English because of their first language. And then I used all those text fragments to build kind of a text collage that became sort of an armature for the music that I scored for the quartet. And many of the melodic pieces that the little melodies and little motifs that that appear in the music that they play were really transcribed pieces of speech. So there was a lot of finding that melody in the speech. But anyway, so that collaboration with, when I do commissioned works for chamber ensembles, the collaboration is mainly in talking over with them what kind of ideas I might have and what I want to do. Then I go away and I compose the piece, and then I deliver a score to them and come to rehearsals and sort of shepherd them through what I was hoping, for. And if I've done my job well, they're able to just do it. And so, yeah.
Wow. Okay, so one thing that also comes to mind related to this topic of collaboration is, it's a process also for getting your work to the world. And so I think when people think about electronic music, they might have a fixed idea it's one thing, but really it's there's a diverse sort of output of music that might be under this realm of electronic music. Maybe there are multiple realms of electronic music. And so for you, obviously collaborating with a group or with somebody else expands the opportunity both for the work itself and also for the audience for that work. And I'm just curious what you think about and in terms of connecting your work to different audiences. Do you have a sense of who your core audience is for what you do? Is it ever evolving depending on the collaboration? And what kind of feedback do you get from people who encounter your music for the first time?
Well, I do feel like I have a certain core audience, and that audience tends to be people in the fine arts and contemporary classical and experimental music and performance world. Those are the people who like that kind of work are the people who know about my work and who already, that I assume, would be interested in it. Right. But I do like having opportunities to expand that world a little bit and surprise people who haven't had an exposure to it. And sometimes that opportunity comes because of either collaborations with other artists or with organizations that, for example, I made a piece a couple of years ago called Carbon Song Cycle. And in order to make that, and it was a collaboration with a visual artist who makes, who's a painter but also does video art, and she worked in her work with me. We were doing multi-channel video projections. But in order to make that work, I actually talked to climate scientists at Stanford, and then she also has a lot of connection with people in the science world. And I did another collaboration just a year or so ago, maybe it was 2 years now, called Span, and it was all about bridges. And it was sort of inspired by the fact that I live in the Bay Area, and there's a lot of bridge activity. The bridges are kind of key in the Bay Area life, because we're always crossing them to get from the East Bay to San Francisco, or from San Francisco to the East Bay, or to the South Bay. There's all these different bridges that we're constantly needing. And there was a lot of sort of major bridge, there were some bridge anniversaries and also a big renovation of one of the bridges. And so there was a lot of bridge chatter at the time, and that sort of inspired me to make a piece about bridges. But in order to make that piece, I went to New York and interviewed a bunch of bridge engineers at an architectural engineering firm called Arup. So there was suddenly this connection between my work and architects and engineers. And so each time I'm doing something like that, where I'm interacting with some group that is maybe outside of the arts per se, I feel like there's a little bit of an outreach or expansion. But it's not like I design those ideas for those pieces for that reason. The work is really kind of my driving force. I do whatever I need to do to make the work, and then I hope that it finds its audience.
That's great. And it seems like you're a very curious person, right? You're investigating these ideas, and you're very open to inspiration from different places, which is great. So can we take a step back for a moment? I would love to hear about sort of the journey that you've taken to this point. A lot of our audience is students or recent alumni who are thinking about wow, I would love to have a diverse career like that. I'd love to have the opportunity to do creative projects similar to that, or at least in the same the ethos of this kind of collaboration we're speaking about. So how did you get started? I mean, were you always kind of mashing up these different ideas in your work? And what were some of the early opportunities that you either created or found that launched your career?
Well, I feel like in the early part of my life, I was what could be accurately described as a musician, and which just seemed like a very, a very easy box to be placed in. And as a kid, I sang, I played viola in the orchestra. I was in all the concert choir and in my high school, and I also played guitar and was a singer-songwriter. And I think that even as a kid, I was playing with sound in funny ways that at the time I didn't have terms for, but now I look back and I say, oh, I guess that was the early beginnings of somebody who would be a sound artist, because I was like playing with machines. My father had bought us these tape recorders, and I was playing with tape recorders and figuring out on my own how to do like overdubbing by going back and forth between two tape recorders, and I was playing with making sound from found objects from a pretty early age. But I still was thinking in a more conventional way when I was thinking about being a musician, and I was thinking I would be a songwriter, and I was going to get famous for like writing songs and playing the guitar and singing, and it kind of in the more rock and folk tradition, and went through school. But then when I got into music school, I was singing opera. And actually, I'd had this really great choral director, music teacher when I was in high school, who gave guidance to people who she thought had talent and could do things, and so she, I think, could be really given some credit for the fact that I chose to, went on to be a music major, and I was a vocal major and was singing opera arias. And at the time when I was in school, it was very the music school was pretty conservative in terms of like in the vocal department, that they thought, most of the teachers in the vocal department thought it was very dangerous to sing anything other than bel canto, I was very lucky to have the one teacher on the faculty who was willing to let their students sing other things, even if he didn't like it or didn't think it was interesting. He didn't like contemporary music, but he let me sing contemporary music because I was interested in it. And he also didn't think that it would hurt my voice to sing rock songs or do my little singer-songwriter thing at night, which was, I was playing in clubs at night and then coming to school in the day. And so I sort of went that way. And it wasn't after I got out of school, I became immediately, I was able to immerse myself in doing, playing gigs. And I was actually making my living as a musician, as a singer-songwriter, playing in clubs. But I was having this struggle where I was playing one kind of music and I was interested in a different kind of music, because I was also doing radio. There was a public radio station where I went to school in Boulder. It was called KGNU, and I was getting my avant-garde education from the stacks of KGNU. And I was playing all this experimental music and ambient music and like Alvin Lucier, and I was finding, and I was doing this freeform radio show that would go from like, I would play the Ramones and then segue into Varese, and I was like, and so I was like, this is weird, because I'm playing at night and I'm just playing this set of songs that are the same songs, and what I really want to be doing is much more experimental. And so it was when I started playing with electronics and processing my voice that I began to learn how to hear sound differently as a composer and think differently about sound as a composer. And I feel like at that time I was listening to Philip Glass, I was listening to Steve Reich, and I feel like those composers kind of gave me permission, sort of, to explore the repetition and processes that can happen slowly in music, and layers and things like that. And so my aesthetic changed, and there was this one sort of year in my life from when I bought my first digital delay, when within a year my entire aesthetic and my entire approach just completely changed. And I actually had to move. I had to move to San Francisco because I had built up quite a following in Colorado. and people didn't understand what was happening because I would like come to these clubs and try to play this new music I was doing.
Yeah.
And they were like, "What are you doing? We like your Joni Mitchell songs, you know?" And so I had to leave, and I moved to San Francisco, and I just started all over again. And then I just sort of like entrenched myself in the contemporary music scene, and there was a really burgeoning, exciting, this was in the 80s, and there was an exciting performance art and experimental music, avant-garde, performance scene, and I just like jumped right into it. So that's just the early beginnings. That doesn't even take you to where I am now, but I know our time is probably limited, so I try to give the Reader's Digest version. It always ends up being.
Well, it's fascinating. So to hear this idea, this curiosity permeating your whole sort of musical trajectory. I mean, I think about the sort of the situation in the terms of sort of the ambidextrous musician. So I think that we have a lot of young people today. There's this idea that you're a classical musician or you're something else when you come to school. But the reality is that most artists that I have a chance to speak with don't think of themselves that way. They don't think about music that way. They think about a whole variety of of types of of art, of forms of modalities of art that inspire them. And they find ways to connect them in an original way. And so it's great to hear that. Also, you mentioned this importance, at least implied it, hinted it here at the cliffhanger, of building or being connected to a community. And that community not only becoming a platform for your work, but enriching your process, your compositional process. So you're still based in San Francisco today?
I am, and I for many years off and on I've been kind of bi-coastal because I love New York, and I spend a lot of time in New York. I will go to New York on the slimmest sliver of an excuse. Like most of the times people will call me and they'll say, "Can you come and play this gig in blah 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 town? And this is the fee we have to offer." And I'll say, "I can't really go for that. I need a better fee than that, or I need you to cover my travel and give me lodging and do this and this and this." But if somebody calls me and says, "Can you come to New York? I'm curating the Stone this week, and it's a door gig, but and I'll be like, "I'm there." I just love going to New York. So I usually the first offer of anything that's happening in New York, I'll say yes, and then I'll build other things around that to support it. So I spend a lot of time there, but my base is still in San Francisco. I live in an artist building that's basically a warehouse that is artist live-work studios. And I have built like my recording studio in there with I have a soundproof isolation booth that I record in and all of that. And it's a little hard for me to let go of all of that, especially given the gentrification that we have going on here. And even before that, what I pay and rent for my studio is, I wouldn't be able to get a matchbox in either of the two cities that I like being in for that, so I have to hang on to that studio. But I do travel I just came from New York, as a matter of fact, before coming here. I do travel to New York a lot, so those are kind of my two cities that I hang in the most.
So it sounds like great places to be or to be landing. The follow-up question, I guess, is just how has your community, think flash forward to today, how has it become more connected via technology distance-wise? Like, do you see your community, I imagine you have this, especially given where you're based and where you work, you have an organic, in-person community that's supporting what you do. But we hear a lot about artists who now have the community that they can connect to all across the country because of how music is distributed.
I think of it as a global community, and it's been that way for a long time. I mean, it's easier now because with the internet and all of Skype and all of that we have, it's. I even did a concert on it. I have a little Avant Chamber series that I produce, that I present in the building that I live in. On the first floor, there's a little performance gallery, and I do this series called The Room Series. And in one of those concerts, the bassoonist Skyped into the concert, like she was on the screen and the rest of us were on stage, and that would have been very difficult to do, just not even that long ago. Sure. But not even talking about that aspect of it, there is something about the arts world and contemporary music world and experimental music world, and that there is this sort of larger global community, and I used to joke that because I travel a lot, and we used to joke about the fact that like this, no matter basically there's 30 people, there's 30 or 40 people that go to every contemporary music concert. And it doesn't even matter what city you're in, it's still the same 30 like, and I would like be in Tokyo and I'd be online to go into a thing and they would turn around and Carl Stone is behind me in line and some, Eric Lyon is in front of me and it's like, it's like, oh, I just saw them at something in New York, But yeah, so it is an interesting group of people that I feel that we have a close kinship and a friendship and a feeling of community, even those of us that don't live in the same city. So,
well, it's exciting. It's great to have you here. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. We're thrilled to have you on campus working with our students, and as part of the PAT performance series tomorrow night. And thank you so much for sharing also a bit of your story. I think that it's so important for our students today to think about what it means to be building this sort of kinship and community with the people. A lot of times I think students are waiting for, they need to get through their schooling and then they can worry about that. Not always realizing that it's the people that they're working with now that are inspiring them and introducing them to different types of music, but also other art forms and other things that they might be curious about. They could lay the foundation for their work in the community later on. So thank you so much for sharing your story today.
Well, thank you for having me.